might have missed these interesting historical photos. Write in the comments which photo you like the most. China, 19th century. This staged execution scene, attributed to William Saunders, was shown in the West as reality. Instead of documenting China, images like this helped manufacture fear and feed colonial stereotypes of Asia. Hollywood, 1943. Actress Frances Farmer was arrested after a probation violation tied to an earlier drunk driving case and allegedly striking a studio hairdresser. A courtroom outburst brought her a 180-day sentence. Belgium, World War II. Inside a reported German torture chamber, crude coffins stand beside devices used for interrogation. The room feels almost ordinary until the objects inside reveal how occupation turned fear into a system. Whitechapel, London, 1888. The year Jack the Ripper struck, the East End was already a maze of overcrowded courts, cheap lodgings, and hunger. The murders became legend, but the deeper horror was the world around them. Poverty so dense it turned whole streets into traps. Soviet Union, 1937 to 1938. During the NKVD's Polish operation, being Polish could be enough to mark a person for death. Over 111,000 people were executed in one of the Great Purge's most targeted ethnic campaigns, while countless families vanished into prisons, camps, and silence. Ireland, 20th century. Women and girls sent to Magdalen laundries worked under harsh control, often unpaid and hidden from public life. The last laundry closed only in 1996, leaving a legacy of forced labor, stolen freedom, and families broken by shame and silence. 1900, a hunter poses in the woods carrying a black bear, turning a kill into a photograph of strength and pride. Before modern wildlife conservation, images like this reflected an era when big game hunting was seen as conquest, not controversy. Stalingrad, 1942 to 43. German troops moved through streets reduced to rubble during one of World War II's most brutal battles. Every block became a battlefield, and the city's ruins helped turn Hitler's Eastern campaign into a catastrophe. Tangiwai, New Zealand, Christmas Eve, 1953. A volcanic lahar from Mount Ruapehu swept away the railway bridge over the Wangehu River. Minutes later, an express train plunged into the flood, killing 151 people in New Zealand's deadliest rail disaster. Whitechapel, London, late 1800s. Children like this slept in streets and doorways, while Victorian London called itself the richest city on earth. Thomas Barnardo used scenes like these to expose child poverty and build homes for those society had abandoned. Massachusetts, 1925. Jesse Pomeroy, once called the Boy Fiend, is photographed after more than 50 years in prison. At 14, he was convicted of murdering 2 children in Boston, then spent 41 years in solitary confinement. Ryaltsovo, Soviet Union, 1942. The Lastochkin family stands after liberation with occupation tags still hanging from their necks. Under German rule, villagers were forced to wear labels showing where they lived, turning civilians into registered bodies under control. German-occupied Warsaw, October 1940. A tram window is marked only for Jews in German and Polish. Weeks before the Warsaw Ghetto was sealed, Nazi rule was already turning daily life into a system of public humiliation and segregation. Paris, 1893. 23-month-old François Bertillon was photographed like a criminal after allegedly biting every pear in a basket. The joke mugshot was taken by his father, Alphonse Bertillon, the man who helped invent modern police identification. Auschwitz, 1941. Metal tattoo stamps like these were used to mark prisoners with numbers instead of names. What looks like a small set of tools became part of a system built to erase identity before destroying life. Bhopal, India, December 1984. Toxic gas leaked from Union Carbide's pesticide plant, poisoning the city overnight. Thousands died, hundreds of thousands were exposed, and CEO Warren Anderson left India on bail, never standing trial there. Dallas, November 22, 1963. Seconds after President John F. Kennedy was shot, a Secret Service agent climbs onto the limousine as it races away from Dealey Plaza. The image captures the instant America's post-war confidence shattered in public view. Salzburg, Austria, March 14, 1938. Young women cheer around a German soldier after the Anschluss, when Nazi Germany absorbed Austria days after Vienna canceled a planned vote on independence. The smiles in the crowd became part of the propaganda image of a takeover presented as a welcome. Nicaragua, 1979. A Sandinista fighter throws a Molotov cocktail during the final uprising against Anastasio Somoza's dictatorship. Captured by Susan Meiselas, the image became one of the most famous symbols of revolution in Latin America. Britain, 1940. A Luftwaffe bomber lies wrecked across a row of houses during the Battle of Britain. The crash brought the air war straight into civilian streets, where every dogfight overhead could end in someone's home. Indonesia, 1945 to 1949. Dutch soldiers question a young Indonesian boy suspected of aiding guerrilla fighters during the War for Independence. The image shows how colonial wars reached even children, turning villages into battlefields of suspicion. Paris, 1889. Women brought from Siam were displayed at a world exhibition for European crowds as part of a so-called human zoo. Behind the spectacle was colonial arrogance. Real people turned into entertainment for an audience that called itself civilized. Borneo, September 17, 1945. Australian Lieutenant Colonel Robson twice refused to accept Major General Uno's sword by hand, forcing the Japanese commander to place it on the ground instead. In that small gesture, surrender became unmistakable. Rank, ritual, and empire lowered into the grass. Budyonnovsk, Russia, June, 1995. Doctors held hostage in the city hospital wrote their names on their white coats. They feared an assault would leave their bodies unrecognizable, turning uniforms of healing into tags for death. United States, 1938. The Radium Girls gather beside Catherine Wolfe Donahue, dying after years of painting glowing watch dials. Told to shape radioactive brushes with their lips, they lost teeth, bones, and lives, then fought in court to expose the companies that poisoned them. This is the 1,000-yard stare, the look of a soldier who survived the battlefield, but whose mind is still trapped somewhere inside it. No blood is visible here, yet the face says everything about what war does after the shooting stops. Montreal, 1976. Women's basketball appears at the Olympics for the first time, with Japan facing the dominant Soviet team. In this frame, Japan's Sachio Yamamoto stands beside Uljana Semjonova, over 2 meters tall and nearly impossible to stop, as the USSR marched unbeaten to gold. Hollywood, 1957. A child poses with the giant monster prop from The Monster That Challenged the World. Built for a Cold War creature feature, the oversized practical effect turned low-budget sci-fi into pure nightmare fuel. Australia, 2005 to 2012. Fugitive Malcolm Naden evaded police for 7 years while hiding in the bush and near a zoo. Wanted for murder and violent crimes, he reportedly stole food, slept near animal enclosures, and became one of Australia's most hunted men. Vietnam War. Civilians crawl through a flooded swamp, hiding from soldiers as fighting reaches their village. With children in their arms and water up to their shoulders, survival meant staying silent, invisible, and below the gunfire. California, 1919. Beachgoers climb onto a dead whale covered in graffiti, turning a stranded giant into a public spectacle. Before modern wildlife protections, even a whale's corpse could become a seaside attraction, photo prop, and open-air billboard. Berlin, 1945. Captured German generals stand together after the city fell and the Third Reich collapsed. The medals and uniforms remained, but the power behind them was gone, reduced to prisoners at the end of Hitler's war. West Germany, 1950s. Free Europe press workers launch balloons carrying leaflets across the Iron Curtain. By 1956, around 600,000 balloons had carried hundreds of millions of printed messages into the Soviet bloc, Cold War propaganda delivered by wind. Spanish Civil War, 1936. A journalist runs across a bridge carrying a child away from the smoke and fighting. In a conflict where streets, homes, and civilians became targets, the man meant to record the war suddenly became part of saving a life. Before blocking and unfollowing, people erased others by hand, cutting faces out of photographs after betrayals, breakups, or family fights. This damaged portrait turns a private grudge into something physical, memory edited with scissors. Beaufort, South Carolina, 1862. An enslaved family poses on a plantation during the Civil War. Behind the stillness of the photograph is the reality of slavery. Families treated as property, while freedom was being fought over nearby. 1989. Kayapo activist Tuira brandished a machete at a Brazilian official during a confrontation over a proposed megadam in the Amazon. The image became a global symbol of indigenous resistance. Electricity won't feed us. We need the rivers to flow free. United States, 1871. Early Ku Klux Klan members pose in ritual robes during Reconstruction after the Civil War. Behind the costumes was a campaign of terror meant to intimidate Black Americans and crush their new political freedom. France, 1994. Bamboula's village displayed Ivorian performers inside a safari park near Nantes, staging an African village for tourists decades after Europe claimed human zoos were history. The scandal was not only the display itself, but how recently it happened. Psychiatric hospital, 20th century. A patient stands alone in a straitjacket, caught between treatment and confinement. Long before modern mental health reforms, many institutions controlled suffering more than they understood it. Innsbruck, Austria, 1934. 17-year-old Walter Lunger lies in hospital after a bomb planted by Nazi militants tore off his right hand. Years before the Anschluss, Austrian Nazis were already using terror to destabilize the country from within. Schweizerhalle, Switzerland, November 1st, 1986. Firefighters battle a chemical plant blaze that sent toxic runoff into the Rhine. The fire became one of Switzerland's worst environmental disasters, poisoning the river for hundreds of kilometers. Australia, 1880. A policeman tries on Ned Kelly's homemade armor after the outlaws' final stand at Glenrowan. Forged from plow metal, it stopped bullets and built the legend, until police shot Kelly's unprotected legs. Soviet Union, 1943. One of the first wartime trials of Nazi collaborators put 11 men before a public court. All pleaded guilty. 3 were sent to labor camps, while the others were hanged in front of the city they had helped terrorize. Russia, November 1917. Armed workers and city militia opened fire on police who remained loyal during the revolutionary uprising. The scene captures the moment revolution became street combat, as old authority collapsed under rifles raised by ordinary civilians. Bolivia, 1966. Che Guevara crossed the border disguised as Ramon Benitez Hernandez, a fake Uruguayan businessman with shaved hair, thick glasses, and a forged passport. Within a year, the disguise collapsed, and his final revolution died with him. Sarajevo, June 30th, 1992. A 20-year-old sniper codenamed Arrow readies her rifle in a safe room during the siege of Sarajevo. A Serb fighting for Bosnian government forces, she said she had already lost count of the people she had killed. Geesthacht, Germany, 1945. British troops capture a German major standing beside boys barely old enough for war. In the final collapse of the Third Reich, Nazi Germany was sending teenagers to the front as its army ran out of men. Nebraska, 1903. Bertha Lee Becka, nicknamed Fainting Bertha, built her pickpocket act around one clever trick. She would collapse into the arms of wealthy men in crowded places, then use their concern and confusion to empty their pockets. Kyoto, Japan. These blood ceilings were made from floorboards taken from Fushimi Castle after its 1600 siege. The dark stains are believed to be blood from samurai defenders who died there, preserved above temple visitors as a memorial. Moscow, 1927. The Moskva River burst over its banks, carrying ice and floodwater through the city center. Near the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, people crossed the drowned streets on planks, years before the metro made Moscow feel modern. London, 1968. The man later convicted of assassinating Martin Luther King Jr. is led away after his arrest. Captured while trying to leave Britain under a false identity, he became the face of one of America's darkest political murders. Brest, France, January 31, 1941. RAF bombers' 3-second exposure captures the sky filled with flak during a night raid. Each white streak marks anti-aircraft fire reaching up from below, showing the deadly Webb bomber crews had to fly through in darkness. Born Norma Jean Mortensen. On June 1, 1926, Marilyn Monroe became one of the most photographed women of the 20th century. Behind the icon was a real person, caught here in a rare moment of unguarded laughter before the world turned her into a legend. Washington, D.C., May 1970. Days after Kent State, Nixon left the White House before dawn and walked into a crowd of anti-war protesters at the Lincoln Memorial. One student was reportedly on LSD. Nixon talked about football and travel as Vietnam was tearing America apart. East Berlin, late 1960s. Workers stand hundreds of meters above the city while building the Berlin Television Tower. Designed to prove the GDR's modern strength, it rose over divided Berlin and became one of the Cold War's most visible symbols. Bear River, Idaho Territory, 1863. U.S. troops attacked a northwestern Shoshone winter camp, killing hundreds of men, women, and children in one of America's deadliest native massacres. The Army called it victory. Survivors called it slaughter. Milan, June, 1946. A woman smiles through a newspaper announcing the birth of the Italian Republic. After fascism, war, and monarchy, Italians voted to choose a republic, and women cast national ballots for the first time. New York, 1897. One of the first full-body X-rays of a living person took about 30 minutes to expose. The image captured not only bones and organs, but also her rings, bracelet, hatpin, boots, and whalebone corset. Mediterranean Sea, June 8, 1967. Israeli jets and torpedo boats attacked the U.S. Navy intelligence ship USS Liberty. The strike killed 34 Americans and wounded 171. Israel called it a tragic mistake, while many survivors believed it was deliberate. 19th century, Hiram and Barney Davis, billed as Wino and Plutano, became famous sideshow performers with P.T. Barnum. Weighing about 45 pounds each, they amazed crowds not just by their size, but by reports of surprising strength and unusual stage presence. Arras, France, March 24, 1917. British soldiers of the Cameronians crawl through a trench during a raid. In World War I, even a short advance could mean climbing into smoke, wire, machine guns, and almost certain chaos. Cairo, 1922. A math teacher stands beside 6 young students in a small Egyptian classroom. That same year, Egypt gained nominal independence from Britain, while children like these were learning numbers in a country still defining its future. Stonehenge, March 17, 1920. Workers lift a massive lintel back into place during official restoration works. After being given to the nation in 1918, the ancient monument was repaired, re-erected, and even set in concrete to stop further collapse. Chelsea, London, circa 1880. 5 elderly veterans of Waterloo pose more than 60 years after helping defeat Napoleon. As young men, they fought in 1815. As old pensioners, they became living relics of a battle that reshaped Europe. Paris, 1910. The Seine flooded the city so badly that streets turned into canals and Parisians moved by boat. Water poured into basements, tunnels, and metro stations, making the French capital look like Venice for weeks. Ambridge, Pennsylvania, 1938. A young girl stands in a city dump, surrounded by boxes, cans, and broken scraps. During the Great Depression, children often searched trash piles for anything their families could reuse, sell, or survive on. Berlin, 1927. A barbershop advertises cheaper haircuts and shaves for the unemployed in the middle of the Weimar years. Behind the city's jazz, cafes, and nightlife, thousands were still counting coins just to look employable again. Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon, cousins of Queen Elizabeth II, were placed in a hospital in 1941 because of their disabilities. For decades, their lives stayed hidden from public view, and records even listed them as dead while Catherine was still alive. Berezina River, 1941. A Soviet SB bomber falls from the sky after being hit near a vital crossing. Below, smoke rises from the battlefield, where bridges and river routes became lifelines in the chaos of Germany's invasion. 1990s, a family photo shows the man later exposed as the BTK killer posing beside his daughter. To the outside world, he looked like a father, neighbor, and church leader, while secretly hiding one of America's darkest double lives. Honolulu, December 7, 1941. The Star Bulletin's extra edition turned the attack into one giant word: war. While smoke still rose from Pearl Harbor, Hawaiians read that Oahu had been bombed, and America's world had changed before noon. Western Front, 1916. A German medic sits beside a dying soldier in the open field, unable to do much more than stay with him. In World War I, survival often depended on seconds, mud, and luck, while mercy sometimes meant simply not dying alone. American Frontier, late 1800s. Belle Starr, born Myra Maybelle Shirley, became known as the Bandit Queen of the Wild West. Linked to outlaws, horse theft, and frontier violence, her 1889 murder turned a criminal life into a lasting Western legend. Soviet Union, July 1941. SS motorcyclists ride through a village left burning during Operation Barbarossa. Behind the speed of the German advance was a trail of destroyed homes, occupation terror, and civilian suffering. Amsterdam, April 30th, 1980. Riots erupt during Queen Beatrix's inauguration as protesters fight police over housing shortages and monarchy. Their slogan, "No home, no coronation," turned a royal celebration into one of the Netherlands' most explosive post-war protests. Tokyo, 1966. Protesters gather outside the Beatles Hotel, demanding the band leave Japan. To conservatives, the outrage was not just the music, it was the idea of a Western rock group playing the sacred Budokan martial arts hall. Paris, 1917. Mata Hari, the famous dancer and courtesan, is photographed after her arrest as an alleged German spy. Weeks later, France executed her by firing squad, turning a murky wartime espionage case into one of history's most haunting legends. Canada, 1930. Legend says trapper Joe LaBelle found an Inuit camp near Anjikuni Lake completely abandoned. No bodies, no clear trail, only an eerie story of a vanished village that later became one of Canada's strangest northern mysteries. Andes, 1972 to 2025. The Valley of Tears, where Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 crashed and vanished into snow. For 72 days, survivors endured freezing nights, avalanches, and starvation, until staying alive meant eating those who had already died. Jerusalem, February 1st, 1948. A car bomb tore through the Palestine Post building, killing 4 people and wounding dozens. The attack targeted one of the Jewish community's major newspapers during the violent months after the UN partition vote. Gdańsk, Poland, 1946. Former Stutthof camp guards stand on the scaffold after being convicted for Nazi camp crimes. Those who once held power over prisoners now faced public judgment before a crowd still living with the ruins of occupation. Brooklyn, December 16, 1960. After a mid-air collision over New York, United Flight 826 crashed into Park Slope. The explosion tore through homes and streets, killing 134 people. The only initial survivor was 11-year-old Stephen Baltz, who died the next day. Off San Diego, California, divers prepared to raise a World War II F-6F Hellcat from 3,400 feet below the sea. Lost in 1944, the fighter spent decades in darkness before being found almost intact on the ocean floor. Bath Township, Michigan, 1927. The Bath school disaster left 45 people dead after explosives tore through the school. Still the deadliest school massacre in U.S. history, it turned an ordinary rural town into the scene of an almost unimaginable act of revenge. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, February 2, 1897. The state capitol burns as crowds watch from the snow. The building was destroyed in hours, forcing Pennsylvania to rebuild its seat of government on the same site 9 years later. Pacific War, 1943. A B-25 Mitchell bomber skims low over Japanese anti-aircraft guns during a strike on enemy positions. At this height, the crew had almost no room for error, just speed, firepower, and seconds between attack and impact. Long Island, New York, 1956. Investigators stand near the shallow grave of 1-month-old Peter Weinberger. Kidnapped for ransom, the baby died after media attention disrupted the drop-off plan, turning a private nightmare into a national tragedy. Cavite, Philippines, 1942. Japanese troops inspect torpedoes captured after taking the naval base near Manila Bay. What had been an American stronghold became enemy supply as the Pacific War moved fast and brutally across the islands. Andaman Islands, colonial era. British officer Maurice Vidal Portman poses with great Andamanese people like they are part of a study. But behind the staged image was catastrophe. Disease, violence, and colonization reduced their population from thousands to fewer than 100 by 1931. Alberta, Canada, July 17, 1964. 500 tons of TNT explode during Operation Snowball, a test designed to mimic a nuclear blast without using a nuclear weapon. For a few seconds, the prairie became a laboratory for Cold War destruction. New Mexico, 1999. David Parker Ray, the Toy Box Killer, was exposed after a victim escaped from his soundproof torture trailer. He was suspected in dozens of disappearances, but died in prison without ever being convicted of murder. Ludlow, Colorado, April 20th, 1914. National Guard troops attacked a striking miners' tent colony during a brutal Cold War. The camp burned, and at least 21 people died, including women and children hiding beneath the tents, turning a labor strike into a massacre. Baghdad, February 13, 1991. U.S. stealth aircraft bombed the Amaria shelter during the Gulf War, killing more than 400 civilians inside. The heat was so intense that victims' handprints were left burned into the walls. Early bulletproof glass test. A woman reportedly holds the pane in front of her face while her husband fires at it. What looks insane today was once sold as proof of trust, courage, and a new technology meant to stop bullets. Burundi, circa 1905. A handmade leopard trap stands in the tall grass, built from poles, branches, and local knowledge. Before rifles and modern wildlife control reached every village, people used traps like this to turn fear of predators into survival strategy. Bulgaria, 1940. A folk healer performs a ritual for back pain using smoke, chants, and an axe held over the patient. Before modern medicine reached every village, illness was often treated as something to be frightened out, not simply cured. Casablanca, February 1944. French crews unpack a U.S.-supplied Curtiss P-40 Kitty Hawk shipped in pieces across the Atlantic. Before it could fight, the warplane had to be rebuilt from crates, one aircraft at a time, far from the factory. Peru, 1971. 17-year-old Julianne Kopka fell from a plane that broke apart in a storm over the Amazon. Still strapped to her seat, she survived a 3-kilometer fall, then walked through the jungle for 11 days, the only survivor among 92 people. January 23, 1943. 3 sailors are rescued aboard USSPC 576 after spending 83 days on a life raft. Their ship, MV Zandam, had been torpedoed by a German U-boat, leaving them to survive hunger, thirst, and the open sea. Querétaro, Mexico, 1867. Emperor Maximilian and his generals face a Republican firing squad after the fall of his French-backed empire. In one volley, Benito Juárez's forces ended Europe's attempt to place a monarch on Mexican soil. Ethiopia, May 1941. Armed men carry captured Italian weapons as they wait to hear of Emperor Haile Selassie's return. After 5 years of fascist occupation, the rifles once used to conquer Ethiopia were now in Ethiopian hands. Los Angeles, 1940. A police mugshot labels a woman simply as lesbian, turning identity itself into evidence. Long before pride flags and legal protection, being suspected of same-sex love could make someone a criminal. England, 1886. John Jackson and Henry Robinson pose in cork life belts after surviving the Eliza Fernley lifeboat disaster. Sent out to save a wrecked crew, their boat capsized in the storm, leaving them as the only 2 survivors of their own rescue mission. East Germany, 1989. Even as the communist regime was collapsing, a border guard still aimed his pistol at someone trying to escape. The Berlin Wall would fall that same year, but until the final months, freedom could still mean running under fire. San Francisco, 1906. Streetcar tracks twist and sink after the earthquake tore open the city's roads. The quake and fires that followed destroyed much of San Francisco, leaving even its transport lines warped into the ruins. North Pole, September 29, 1963. Soviet nuclear submarine K-181 surfaced through Arctic ice during a historic mission. The crew found a rare opening where the ice was only 30 to 50 centimeters thick, thin enough for the submarine to break into the world above. Canada, 20th century. Indigenous children sit in a residential school, part of a system built to separate them from family, language, and culture. About 150,000 children were taken into these institutions, and the last federally run school closed only in 1996. 1930s to 40s. As Europe feared the next war would bring poison gas into civilian streets, inventors even tried to make gas masks look pretty. This strange fashion ad shows how deeply war anxiety entered daily life, when survival gear was being redesigned like a beauty accessory. At Strasbourg Cathedral, the virtues don't just defeat evil, they literally crush the vices beneath their feet. Captured in 1853, this Gothic stone lesson shows how medieval cathedrals preached morality without a single spoken word. April 16, 1912. Harriet Quimby became the first woman to fly across the English Channel, but history barely noticed because the Titanic had sunk the day before. A pioneer of aviation, she broke records in the sky, then died in a flying accident just months later. Florida, 1989. Ted Bundy gives his final interview one day before execution, trying to shift blame for his crimes onto pornography. After confessing to dozens of murders, even his last words to the cameras became part confession, part manipulation. Eastern Front, World War II. German soldiers stand in silhouette as a house burns behind them. The fire turns the scene into a shadow play of occupation, where villages became battlefields and civilians often lost everything before dawn. Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. Smoke rises from USS California after Japanese torpedoes and bombs tear into Ford Island. In the foreground, a civilian watches from shore as America's Pacific Fleet burns, and history changes in front of him. Kyiv, September 24, 1941. Khreshchatyk burns after Soviet-planted radio mines explode under German-occupied buildings. The blasts tore through the city's main street, killing hundreds of German personnel and turning central Kyiv into fire and rubble. Royal Navy at sea. A small ship rides the crest of a massive wave, its bow hanging above the drop. Whether wartime or post-war, the image shows the ocean as the Navy's oldest enemy, silent, sudden, and bigger than any ship. Newcastle, England, 1874. 12-year-old Jane Farrell was photographed after stealing a pair of boots. For that small theft, Victorian justice sent her to 10 days of hard labor, turning a child's poverty into a criminal record. Poitiers, France, 1901. Blanche Monnier was found locked in a dark attic after 25 years of imprisonment by her own family. She had reportedly been hidden away for refusing to abandon a forbidden romance, turning a wealthy home into a private prison. Cuba, April 1961. Captured members of Brigade 2506 stand in line after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. Trained and backed by the CIA, they landed expecting an uprising, only to become prisoners in one of America's most humiliating Cold War defeats. Cuba, April 1961. Captured members of Brigade 2506 stand in line after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. Trained and backed by the CIA, they landed expecting an uprising, only to become prisoners in one of America's most humiliating Cold War defeats. Moscow, October 20th, 1982. After a UEFA Cup match between Spartak Moscow and Harlem, a crush broke out at Luzhniki Stadium. Officially, 66 fans died, yet in the Soviet Union, one of football's deadliest stadium disasters was kept almost silent for years. Paris, 1917. Mata Hari, the famous dancer and courtesan, is photographed after being arrested as an alleged German spy. Within months, she was executed by firing squad, turning a murky World War I case into one of history's most famous spy legends. Canada, 1930. Legend says trapper Joe LaBelle found an Inuit camp near Anjikuni Lake, abandoned in the snow. The vanished village story spread as a northern mystery, but later investigations found little proof, making it more myth than confirmed history. World War II. An American medic from the 2nd Armored Division bandages a wounded German soldier. Minutes earlier, they may have been enemies. But on the battlefield, a white armband could turn war into a fight to keep anyone alive. Nevada, February 1st, 1951. KTLA cameras filmed an atomic blast as television brought the nuclear age into American living rooms. For the first time, viewers could watch a mushroom cloud rise almost like breaking news, turning Cold War fear into broadcast spectacle. Johnny Eck poses beside the fake legs he used in his magic act, where audiences believed he had been sawn in half. Born without the lower half of his body, he turned his disability into one of sideshow history's most unforgettable illusions. Germany, 1945. After the liberation of a camp near Hanover, a Red Cross nurse gives medicine to a starving Holocaust survivor. After years of being treated as less than human, even this small act of care became a return to life. San Francisco Bay, 1968. Japan Airlines. Flight 2 landed in the water after the pilot mistook the foggy bay for the runway. All 107 people survived without injury, and the jet was later repaired and flew again, turning a near disaster into aviation legend. Japan, 1969. A Zengakuren student protester charges riot police with a wooden plank as Tokyo's streets turned into battlegrounds between youth radicals and the state. For Japan's post-war generation, protest was no longer just a march. It had become open confrontation. Florida, January 28, 1986. A backup teacher watches Space Shuttle Challenger rise into the sky. Just 73 seconds later, an O-ring failure tore the shuttle apart, killing all 7 crew members and turning a moment of pride into national grief. 18th century. The first chainsaw-like tool was not made for trees, but for surgery. Developed by Scottish doctors, it was used in childbirth procedures to cut pelvic bone and cartilage before safer modern C-sections existed. Prague, May 1945. German civilians and prisoners are marched through the streets in the chaotic days after liberation. At Bohuslavka, around 41 people were killed in a revenge massacre, proof that even after Nazi defeat, the violence did not stop at once. Vietnam, March 1966. U.S. Marines lead a captured North Vietnamese soldier after fierce fighting in a trapped valley. While troops fought at ground level, American aircraft launched one of the war's largest bombing efforts so far, turning one day into a brutal snapshot of escalation. Florida, 1896. Dr. DeWitt Webb stands beside the St. Augustine monster, a massive carcass once believed to be a giant unknown octopus. For nearly a century, it fueled sea monster rumors, until tissue tests later showed it was most likely decomposing whale blubber. Write your opinion about these photos in the comments. I will be glad to answer you.